especially if you're engaged in competitive selling to homeowners who are actively shopping for solar and actively soliciting bids from different companies. Oftentimes, you're going to have to justify why you chose a specific type of equipment.
When someone says, "Oh, solar," I'm not saying, "Oh, I'm in the inverter industry." It's like, no, I'm in the solar industry. People are used to seeing a solar panel, but really the bread and butter is the inverter.
This is likely going to come up with a more of a technical buyer. Guys, I do not recommend that you get into any of this during your standard sales presentation. This would be if an objection was raised. All right, welcome back to the Solar Surge live training here. We are streaming out right now to Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And guys, of course, we are here every week at the same time, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to deliver a 1-hour live solar sales training. At this time, I'd like to bring my co-host on. Dan Freshley here is a co-owner of Solar Surge University and my partner here on the live trainings as well. Dan is the founder and CEO at Radiant Solar, one of the larger independent solar dealers here on the East Coast. And Dan has experience doing solar in many different ways, working in an install company, working as an independent dealer, doing in-home sales, virtual sales, door-to-door sales, you name it. So he's going to be able to bring some perspective that many of you guys may not have seen or heard yet. So Dan, welcome back. Thank you for being here on the Solar Surge live training.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Joe. Thanks for the intro. And, it kind of gets weird hearing the same thing about yourself every time, but I always appreciate the compliments.
Well, we're hoping that these videos are getting out to more and more people that are in the solar industry, or maybe they're thinking about joining the solar industry. And our goal with these videos, guys, is to give you some valuable, actionable information that can either get you an idea of what it's like to sell solar, or if you're already in the profession, give you some tools and some techniques that will help you to be a more effective, more professional solar sales representative. So that's why we're here for that. Now, in today's video, we're going to be talking specifically about how to sell the Enphase solar system, or maybe I should say the Enphase solar platform, because it's a lot more than just an inverter system. But when you're engaged in competitive selling, especially if you're engaged in competitive selling to homeowners who are actively shopping for solar and actively soliciting bids from different companies, oftentimes you're going to have to justify why you chose a specific type of equipment or a specific system component for that system. And I think that probably plays into a larger trend that we're seeing here in the industry, which is that the age of the super low information solar buyer is coming to an end. And much like, you've seen in other industries, like the auto industry, for example, they talk about a used car salesman. In reality, there aren't that many used car salesmen out there anymore because they're just not needed. There's too much information available now online. Consumers know how to go shopping and know how to get the information they want about the various vehicle products that are out there. And we're seeing the same thing now starting to develop in solar, where homeowners are very knowledgeable about the different options that are available for different solar equipment, but they want to work with a professional who can help them best make sense of all the different options that are out there and ultimately get them the solution that's going to best meet their needs. So, Dan, I'll throw it over to you on this. Why do you think it's so important that we be prepared to be able to sell and justify our specific equipment choices in today's solar market?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. And as you were talking about that, Joe, there was for a long time, there's been that adage of kind of and I feel bad for them, frankly, but the used car sales, right? Like that sort of, oh, you're a used car salesman. And we know that that's probably a pretty big generalization. But the problem is that, and we've talked about this before, the day might come where people say, oh, you're a solar salesman, right? Like that's unfortunately the trend in many markets, that things are sort of progressing. And so, kind of counter to that, what we obviously strive to do here at Solar Surge, as well as part of Solar Surge University, is to really make that actually be a tremendous compliment when someone says, oh, you're a solar salesperson, right? It's like, oh, you're professional, you're thorough, you know your stuff. I came off of a meeting just about an hour ago where the gentleman I was meeting with was, let's put it this way, if I didn't know and took the time in my career to really study the industry, I would have been totally outmatched, right, in the conversation. And it wasn't intended to be something like that, but it was genuinely a homeowner that really just wanted to know things on a more technical basis. And if I wasn't prepared to be a professional solar salesperson, I wouldn't have been able to handle that conversation properly. So I think that's a big part of just being an expert. You've heard us before if you follow the channel or watched any of our live streams. It's like a doctor, right? We want to be that person that when you're coming to an expert and you're coming to engage with someone, you're walking into our office and we want to have a proper, thorough examination and evaluation of what you're looking for, and then present a solution, give a professional, guidance on where to go and what makes the most sense. So I think part of it too is just making sure, just doing it the right way, doing it thoroughly, doing it professionally. And that's really what we're all about here.
Yep, absolutely. And you touched on a good point too, talking about the professional selling process, regardless of what solar solution you might be favoring. I know today we're going to talk a lot about the Enphase solution, but still all professional selling starts with needs analysis. So before you try to sell or pitch any particular equipment, the first thing you need to do in the sales engagement is to conduct a thorough discovery and really interview the prospect to figure out what are their needs, goals, pain points, and firm technical requirements. And then if Enphase is the right match, then you can come back with a solution and show the homeowner how the features and capabilities of this particular product line match up to their goals and their requirements. But everything's
Absolutely.
with
It's part of our 3-step process, right? I mean, it's something we've talked a lot about, which, by the way, anybody that's watching now today, if you want to download our 3-step sales process, there should be a link down in the description. But that's a very just thorough playbook, if you will, to the route that we go and the way that we take our processes. But it all starts, if you've heard us talk about it before, needs analysis and a quality discovery conversation. And frankly, with how we do things here at Solar Surge in our sales process, we spend proportionally probably double, maybe even triple the amount of time on that part of the conversation, the needs analysis and discovery, and a fraction of that amount, or equivalent time in the actual presentation of the solution. Because once we've discovered and done our needs analysis thoroughly, now the presentation, frankly, is streamlined. It's fairly simple because we already know what option we're going with. But again, it all starts in needs analysis. And as we get into it today, we're going to talk a lot about that needs analysis moving into the presentation and proposing of an Enphase system. What does that look like? It could be everything from inverters to battery to other, other items. So anyway, we'll get into that a little bit more here. And then as always, guys, if you have questions as we do these live streams and these live calls, please post them in the comments. We love hearing from you guys. That's the intention of why we do these calls on a weekly basis. Obviously, we want to provide value, bring some knowledge and education to the market, but we also want to help fellow, solar professionals, aspiring solar professionals that might have questions. So drop them in the comments throughout. We'll answer them as best as we can, and look forward to getting into this discussion a little bit more here with you, Joe.
Absolutely. So let's talk about it. So we know we're going to start with needs analysis, and I was just kind of reaching over to grab, guys. Again, we've got the 3-step virtual process that we use at Solar Surge available on the free download. So please grab that if you haven't. But let's say you've done your needs analysis, and based on your expert opinion, you believe that the Enphase solution, or maybe some parts of the Enphase platform, are going to be the best fit for your homeowner's goals. And so that's what we're going to present during phase 2, which is actually delivering the pitch, actually giving the sales presentation. So let me bring up on the screen here some of the key points that we will generally communicate during that phase of the presentation, where we're explaining why we've chosen the equipment we've chosen. And so I always advocate, show them the system design on your design software, show them what the solar might look like on their roof model, and then explain to them why you chose the major system components that you did: the solar panels, the inverters, and the batteries. But the most important equipment decision, in my opinion, is the inverter platform, because this is the one that's going to determine your overall system architecture, your system reliability. It's going to determine which monitoring app you use, and it may limit you to which enhancements you could add on in the future, like which batteries, or could you hook a generator up, things like this. But here are the main key points that we talk about when we talk about an Enphase system. The first one that you've probably heard about is no central point of failure. Since we don't have a central inverter, basically we have a small inverter on each individual solar panel. there's no potential for an inverter malfunction to bring down the entire system. The second is panel level monitoring. And I know there are some other solutions out there that offer panel level monitoring, but this is a big one for homeowners, is being able to see not only the overall system performance, but being able to drill down on their app and actually be able to see how each individual solar panel is producing and is performing. Now, a third major differentiator between Enphase and some of the cheaper options is the standard 25-year warranty. At least that's the terms that we get here in the United States. So you don't have to purchase an extended warranty to cover the entire 25 years. And that's very important because the most popular solar loans being offered today are 25-year term loans. And so many homeowners want the security and peace of mind of knowing that the system that they've purchased and that they're going to be making payments on potentially for up to 25 years is fully warranted for the entire 25 years. And then number 4 is what I call the IQ platform. And this is what you're going to see a lot of the inverter manufacturers are offering now. It's not just an inverter, but it's a whole platform that other components can plug into. But it's the Enphase IQ platform, which today consists not only of micro-inverters, but you've got options for batteries, bi-directional EV chargers, generator hookup, load controllers. I mean, it's a whole number of different components that make up an entire home renewable energy system. And we're going to be diving more into that to give you a better understanding of what's available today. But at this point, Dan, I'd like to throw it back over to you. Do you have any other things to add on selling points for Enphase?
Yeah, one of the things that I tell clients a lot of times, and I think this is a good, maybe professional appropriate sales phraseology, is just simply saying, hey, look, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, the solar panel that I've chosen for your home is only going to be as good as the inverter that I have paired with it as well. And naturally, what I have found over the years of working with thousands of homeowners is that we put a huge emphasis, and by we, I should say, most of the time, homeowners looking for solar are putting a big emphasis on the solar panel, because after all, that is what you see, right? That's when someone says, oh, solar, I'm not saying, oh, I'm in the inverter industry. It's like, no, I'm in the solar industry. People are used to seeing a solar panel, but really the bread and butter is the inverter. How well is that inverter converting the power from DC to AC? Are there efficiency losses? Is it sized right? Is there too much clipping? There's a lot of different technical features that we can get into on that discussion. But that's the line I often say is, hey, look, this solar panel, no matter which one it is, that panel is only going to be as good as the inverter I paired with it. And I need to make sure that I pair the appropriate inverter with it. That could be a string inverter, or in this case, it could be micro inverters. It could be, string inverters with optimizers, or it could be, in this case with Enphase, one of the multiple different IQ7, IQ8 models that they provide when it comes to their inverters. So we'll talk a little bit more through all of that here today. Panel level monitoring, obviously, jokingly, I tell people, it's like, look, solar is not like the car that you just drove off the lot and you're going to interact with it every day and you're going to sit there and you're going to touch the buttons. It's like, you're not going to do that with solar. It's going to sit there on your roof or be on the ground. So the panel level monitoring is what gives you that peace of mind of making sure things are working correctly. And it's kind of a fun party trick of like, hey, look, this is what my solar system's doing, and sort of showing that off with people. The 25-year warranty obviously is a big part. A lot of other competitors to Enphase don't offer that as a standard warranty. So that is a nice feature to have that right out of the box. And then the IQ platform, like you said, Joe, I think is really the real big selling point for Enphase, is the ability to kind of grow and scale and do some other things. And so we'll unpack that a little bit more. And maybe even, Joe, I just thought about this, but maybe that diagram would be a good reference point at some point in the conversation. I'm sure you probably already got that pulled up handy though.
Yep, I actually have that Enphase system architecture diagram, which we can present later on in the training. It's a little bit more technical, but I would like you guys to really understand what all the different components that are available here, because a lot of times when you're presenting a solution to the homeowner, it's not just, hey, what is the solution to my immediate needs now? But it's, how does this system set me up so that I'm future proof, so that if I want to do battery backup in the future, or if I'm planning on purchasing an electric vehicle in the future, or if maybe I want to get a backup generator to back up my batteries in the future, am I set up for that? And so we want to make sure that you can articulate that the equipment choice aligns with both the immediate current goals as well as the homeowner's future plans for enhancement and expansion. Now, Dan, you touched on another point too. which I think is important, because I like to articulate this, and I articulate this a lot to homeowners when I'm working with them one-on-one. But there are 4 major decisions that you have to make on a solar system. Now, the ones that I say are tied for number one, or number one, number two, are: did I choose the right installer, and did I choose the right inverter platform? And the reason is because these are really the questions that you can't really undo them. Once you do them, you can't really undo them, right? Number one, choosing the right installer is so important, because when you're investing in solar, you're not just buying an off-the-shelf product. You're buying a construction project that a contractor is going to execute, and you're buying a 25-year warranty, in most cases a 25-year warranty that comes with that construction project. So making sure that you choose the right construction partner. And I guys, you're gonna hear me say it all the time: don't be so short-sighted to just shop on who's the cheapest price contractor, but really think about, who do I have the most confidence in working with over the next 25 years. So that is 100% important, very important decision. And then right up there on the equipment side would be, which inverter platform do I go with? Because once you're on the inverter platform, that's pretty much what you're stuck with. You can always add batteries later. You can add more solar panels later. You might add other accessories later, but choosing the right inverter platform is the number one most important equipment choice. And then I would say followed by the battery, if you're thinking about a battery backup. And then the solar panel itself, as you said, Dan, even though it's the thing that we see all the time, it's probably the least important equipment choice, because the solar panels pretty much all do the same thing. So as long as we can get enough panels to produce the amount of energy that you need, it doesn't really make that much difference which brand solar panel we use, as long as the system is sized properly.
Yeah, look, the discrepancy at the end of the day when it comes to solar panels is, we need to know practically speaking, it's what is the kilowatt hour output, right? The kWh output. That's really ultimately what we need to know out of the solar system. And the differences between a tier 1 high efficiency premium panel with amazing degradation rates versus most industry standard panels, you're not going to have a huge noticeable difference in performance. And then even for maybe those that are like, yeah, but what about long-term? Even long-term, even with degradation rate changes. I mean, typically when I've ran the math over a 25-year period, we take an REC panel at 0.25% degradation, or a Q cell panel at 0.5% annual degradation, and you pencil that out over 25 years. Really, the discrepancy in the end, it comes out to being, add one more panel into the Q cell system, and the kilowatt hour productions would have been effectively the exact same. So it's not a huge change in that variable, but the inverter really is the bread and butter, because which inverter you choose too is going to limit maybe some battery add-on capabilities, or it's going to make it more efficient or less efficient. And so I 100% agree there, Joe. I think inverter, aside from contractor at the very beginning, is the most important. I had a conversation with a gentleman today as well, who reached out to us, already has a solar system. And the reason why he reached out to us is because he's had a frustrating experience with his existing contractors, not sure if they're around, not responsive, all these different things. And we've heard these stories time and time again. But beyond that, it's right inverter, battery. Do you want the battery now? Are you going to add it later? Okay, we need to consider some features and factors now. And then finally would be the solar panel, if I kind of ranked those in a proper order of importance. So I wholeheartedly agree there with you, Joe.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Dan. And yeah, so now that we're talking about the inverter platform specifically, let's pull up that other slide that you had referenced, where we can talk more about, okay, what is everything that makes up this platform? Okay, so the Enphase IQ platform in 2023, of course, you've got the micro-inverters, right? The micro-inverters, pretty much every Enphase solar system has micro-inverters. You have one micro-inverter on each solar panel, and then you have what's called a combiner. So all the microinverter output, it comes into one combiner box, so that you have one single aggregate circuit that you can do for your interconnection. Now you also have the IQ batteries. And today we have 2 different sizes of IQ batteries. We have the 5P, which is Enphase's newest home battery. And we have the IQ Battery 10T, which is the more popular battery and the one that I'm using most for people that want whole house backup. We're typically using 3 of the 10T batteries to get to 30 kilowatt hour storage. By the way, those numbers refer to the kilowatt hour storage capacity of the battery. So the smaller battery is the 5P, the larger battery is the 10T. Now, they also are developing a bi-directional EV charger. And some of you may have seen the video that we published a couple of months ago about the new bi-directional EV charger. And so the nice thing about this is, for those of you or for those homeowners who have already made the investment or maybe planning on making the investment in an electric vehicle, a bi-directional EV charger is essentially an EV charger where you can charge the vehicle from solar or from the grid, but you can also draw energy from the vehicle battery and use that to energize inside the house for emergency backup purposes, or for the purposes of avoiding having to buy from the utility during peak rate hours. If you've got extra energy in your EV battery, you can just pull from that and then go back to pulling from the utility once the peak rate hours are over. You've got the Enphase IQ system controller. In fact, let me show you this graphically because I think it'll do a better job than what I'm trying to do here on the visual slide. But with the Enphase IQ system controller, which is this component right here, this essentially acts as a whole house intelligent transfer switch that allows you to integrate up to 5 different power sources. So you have grid power, you have solar power, you have home battery power optionally, you have electric vehicle battery power optionally, and then it gives you a generator hookup option as well. And so all of those different power sources are integrated here at the Enphase IQ system controller, and it then allows you to prioritize and program how you want those power sources to be used and in what order, right? If you're on a one-for-one net metering customer, then your batteries are probably going to be just used for emergency backup purposes only. On a normal day, you're probably going to be running off solar if you can. Whatever solar extra gets sold back to the power company, get your net metering credits, and then draw from the power company at night, use the battery for backup only. But for those of you who are in time of use markets, think California, Arizona, where you have significant price differences depending on the time of day of what your rate of electricity is, you may want to take advantage of using the battery during certain peak hours. So again, you can be drawing off your own lower cost solar energy that you generated as opposed to having to buy from the power company. Dan, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I actually wanted to share just really quick here, Joe, if I could. I have an image. I was out at a client's house yesterday. Hopefully this is coming through here. And so this is an example, guys, for maybe those that are wondering, okay, what does this equipment actually look like, right? So the bigger unit you see here to the right, this is the Enphase IQ 10T battery. Now, we'll talk about this as we go through the Enphase system a little bit more. There is the ability to integrate other battery systems. Obviously, this is kind of keeping it within inside the Enphase ecosystem all the way through, as Joe was just describing, but it does give you the ability to integrate other batteries as well. The middle unit here, the smaller box with the red label on it, that's your combiner box. Every solar system, regardless of whether or not you have a battery, will have that combiner box. Like Joe just described, that's essentially the central point of connection for all of the solar panel power that's been produced, fed through the microinverters down to this combiner box. And then to the left here, that is the system controller. So the system controller will, be involved with every battery system. And that system controller becomes that sort of central hub, like Joe just described, where you can integrate generator capabilities or bi-directional EV charging capabilities. So this is what a battery system from Enphase, all equipment that you will ultimately have. The battery itself could be the 10T, could be Enphase's, newer released 5P as that starts coming to the market a little more. You're always going to have a system, the combiner box in the middle, and then you're going to have that system controller as well. And then obviously, just for reference here, off to the left, far left there was the home's main service panel. And in this case, this was a critical loads backup system. So one battery designed to back up a subset of loads. So to the furthest left panel over there, that is their dedicated backup panel for the battery system. In other words, the battery is instantaneously powering any of those appliances that are in that panel in the event of an outage. So just wanted to kind of show an actual picture of a project here to put a little bit of better context to this.
Yeah. So as you can see, there's a number of different things going on with this installation. And this is what we would consider a smaller battery installation. Many of our clients who are doing whole house backup are going to be having 3 of those IQ 10T batteries, which I believe can be vertically stacked up to 3. So you don't necessarily need more of a footprint in terms of floor space. But you can see, guys, there's a lot going on here. It's more than just solar panels on the roof. And being able to explain and articulate this to a homeowner is also going to put you in a very strong position. It's just going to communicate to the homeowner that you understand what you're offering. You're not just going off of what's written on the paper. You actually understand sort of some of the practical considerations of what it's going to take to get that system installed and properly integrated into that homeowner's electrical system. By the way, I see comments coming in here from Tom. I believe Tom is one of our clients under contract who's going to be having this Enphase IQ system installed here shortly. So Tom, thanks for the comment in, and we look for wish you success on your solar installation. Okay. Now, one other thing that we talked about, Dan, and I'd like to touch on a little bit too for the audience, is the question of the proper pairing of solar panels to microinverters. Because like in any competitive situation, right, you have different things that the competitors will hit each other on. And so typically Enphase will hit SolarEdge being the market leading central inverter manufacturer for residential. So Enphase will hit SolarEdge with, our system is more resilient. There's no central point of failure. And that's to the most extent true. There's no central inverter point of failure. SolarEdge will hit Enphase with, well, there's too much clipping loss. Right. And so what clipping loss means is you have a solar panel, let's say, that's rated at 400 watts for ideal lab conditions, but you have it connected to a microinverter that's rated for 300 watts max output, or maybe 330 watts if you go one model up. So why is there that discrepancy between a 400 watt panel and a 330 watt microinverter? That's potential clipping. Right. Dan, do you get this question often?
Yeah, it's so guys, just so you know too, this is definitely going to be the more advanced question, right? Sometimes depending on your process of selling or how you generate your opportunities, some of these questions are way above people's knowledge base. And frankly, some people, again, don't want to know the answer. But let's just kind of preface the fact that we're having a conversation that is more technical today. So we're going to really get into this. I do get that question from time to time from somebody that's more researched and understands some of the principles. And the reality of it is too, guys, is that clipping isn't a bad thing. Sometimes we do, and you're going to experience clipping, particularly in the core summer months. If a system is designed right and the inverter is selected properly, you're going to see some clipping in the summer when solar production is most optimal. And that clipping is by design, because in the fall, winters, and spring, when solar production isn't as optimal, the clipping that you experience in the summer will end up having a more impactful benefit in the later part of the year, because of the relationship between the solar panel sizing and the inverter sizing is more optimum. So just know that clipping can happen. I guess the basic way to describe clipping to a lot of people too is the inverter has now reached a maximum production threshold, and any performance that the solar panel could have possibly still created, you're no longer going to be able to capture. And so you've maxed out at whatever that relationship may be. And we'll get into a little bit of the technicals here as to how that gets sized. It has a lot to do with the wattage of the panel, the wattage or volt amp ratings, as well of the inverters. But just know that clipping, there's a proper relationship. Some clipping is okay. Too much clipping means the system just wasn't designed properly.
Exactly. And for those of you who may not even be familiar with the terms that we're using, let me just take a step back and explain the basics of why clipping is an issue with solar systems. So all solar power systems, all solar panels and solar cells are natively a direct current electrical device. They're DC direct current, which means constant voltage. You have a 12-volt battery in your car, it's always a 12-volt difference between the positive and the negative terminal, or right in a tight range there. Our homes and the electric grids are wired for alternating current. And so with alternating current, the voltage actually oscillates in a sine wave, up and down, reversing polarity here in the US at a frequency of 60 cycles per second. So you actually have the voltage kind of reversing direction 60 times per second. But the average voltage, or what we call the RMS voltage, is 240 volts for a US residential home service. Or if you take half of that with one leg, you get 120 volts. And that's why we have 120 volts on our outlets. But every solar power system that's hooked up to power your home or to send power to the electric grid has to have inversion, right? There has to be an inversion, which is converting DC electricity could be coming from solar cells, could be coming from batteries, into alternating current electricity, which is actually usable by the circuits and the appliances in our home and actually exportable out to the power company, right? It's got to match, the electricity has got to kind of match formats. And so the inverter does that function. So when you're looking at the power ratings on the system, there's two power ratings to look at. One is, what is the power rating of the DC output of, let's say, the solar panel or the battery? And so if that DC output is fed from the solar panel into a microinverter, then the microinverter itself has a separate power rating, which is how much AC power output can the microinverter actually send out to be used within the house. And so there's oftentimes a discrepancy. We call it the DC to AC size ratio in between those things. And so, Dan, when you touched on earlier that it's actually not a bad thing to have a higher DC rating than the AC rating of your inverter, because overall the inverter actually works more efficiently if it's dealing with power flow that is close to the max, but just not exceeding the max of what its capacity. So you might lose something on the high end, but you also may gain something on the low end because of a more efficient conversion. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to realize as well, guys, I think no matter what market you're in, I mean, even in Southern California, Arizona, the markets with very, very high optimum solar productions, we're going to experience typically, if you just look at the quantity of days, you're going to have a larger amount of portion of the year where solar production is not considered its maximum, right? So the summer months, almost everywhere in the US are going to produce phenomenal amount of solar production. It's just the reality of the irradiance and the rotation of the earth and et cetera. But in the falls, spring, and summer, that's really where the bigger differences can be made up based on what we're referring to here, the way the ratio plays out between your inverter sizing and your solar panel sizing. And so you're exactly right, Joe. We might lose a little bit in the summer months, but frankly, everywhere will produce phenomenally in the summer months. The area for you to really have your system work best for you annualized is outside of summer months, is how well do we capture performance in the fall, the winters, and the spring to make a great annualized performance for your system.
Right. Let me pull up on the screen here now, because I think this might better illustrate for some of the audience here. I'm pulling up the data sheet here from Enphase for their IQ8 microinverter line. And so one of the things that you'll notice here, let me go down to the second page. So one of the things that you notice here is that there's actually several different models of IQ8 microinverters. You've got the base IQ8, you've got the IQ8 Plus. You've got the IQ8M, the IQ8A, and the IQ8H. Okay. You also have the IQ8H 208 volt, but this is not something we're going to be really using in a residential system. And so what you'll also see here is that there is a corresponding maximum power output, peak output power for each model. So starting with the IQ8, you have a 245 watt limit. On the IQ8 Plus, a 300 watt limit. On the IQ8M, a 330 watt limit. On the IQ8A, it goes up to 366 watts peak power, and the IQ8H, which goes up to 384 watts peak power. Now, again, this is peak output power. It's not how much solar panel input it can take, but this is peak AC output power, usable inverted power that can be used by your home or by the electric grid, or export it to the electric grid. Now, if you go up here, it'll tell you what size range solar modules you could pair with this microinverter. And so you'll notice that a microinverter that has an output rating of 384 watts could take input from solar panels rated anywhere from 320 watts all the way up to 540 watts on the DC power rating, right? So you can see that there's an overload capacity here. Same thing on the IQ8A. This one can take input up to 500 watts on the DC side, even though it's only going to be putting out 366 watts of usable AC output power. And you'll see the same thing going on down the line here with the other models. And so a question that a lot of folks might ask, you might be asking, your homeowners might be asking, hey, if I have a 400 watt solar panel, don't I have to use the largest microinverter, or don't I need to use a larger microinverter? And the answer in most cases is no, not really. And I'm going to explain why in a little bit. But before I do that, Dan, did you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think as we get into that conversation here that you were just referencing, that'll be where the greatest value comes in. But yeah, I mean, what we see typically, I can say from a lot of the systems that I've designed and worked on, That IQ8 Plus to IQ8M tends to be the area that most average panels in the market today, around 400 watts, maybe 410, 420s, depending on if you're the size and scope. I mean, that's a separate conversation in and of itself. But that IQ8 Plus and IQ8M ends up being a very common pairing for a lot of the systems that I personally design. But yeah, Joe, let's get into a little bit more about that whole relationship.
Yep. And same for me too, by the way. Those are the two models that I use most frequently on my projects. Now I'm going to illustrate why. This is the product data sheet for the Qcell 400 watt all black panel. This is probably the most popular residential solar panel being sold and being installed across the country right now, the Qcell 400. And I want to show you on their data sheet some of the electrical characteristics and why we might pair a certain panel with a certain microinverter. So if you notice, their product range also has a range of different sort of submodels that are part of this product line. They range from 385 watts on the low end to 405 watts on the high end. Now, this is what we call the STC rating, which stands for Standard Test Conditions. Okay. Standard test conditions are 1,000 watts per square meter light applied directly perpendicular to the solar cell at 25 degrees Celsius. In other words, this is perfect, ideal lab conditions. It's never going to get any better than this. This is the best thing it can do if everything were perfect in terms of irradiance and the module was kept cool, so you didn't have any losses because of the panel starting to overheat.
I think it's important real quick there too, Joe. I just want to interject without getting too off topic. Guys, layman's terms here too. It will not produce like this in a real world environment. We're just not going to see a 400 watt panel is not going to produce 400 watts because you're not going to see that type of environment. You might get a very lucky, fortunate day, cool temperatures. It's also something to consider though too. As I mentioned a little earlier, summer performance is going to be great everywhere. But proportionally speaking, you might actually get better performance out of a solar system in the Northeast in the middle of summer than you would out of Phoenix, Arizona. Having a lot to do with temperature coefficients and things of that sort can make an impact there. But I think the main thing just to know here, laboratory perfect environment scenarios, not real world scenarios.
Correct. And the solar panel manufacturer is telling you that right here, because they're telling you the standard test condition rating of this panel is 400 watts. But if you go down here where it says normal operating conditions, that same 400 watt solar panel has a power rating of 300 watts, right? And so normal operating conditions, it's slightly less irradiance because again, in the real world, it's almost never going to be where the sunlight is directly hitting perpendicular on the solar cells. Usually you're going to have a little bit of an angle, a little bit of reflection because the sun is moving throughout the sky throughout the day. You're also going to have thermal losses, meaning that, you're going to have extreme high temperatures on the rooftop. And the solar panel produces ideally at 25 degrees Celsius, is about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. But on a summertime on a rooftop here in the United States, I mean, you're talking about anywhere 120 degrees, could be upwards of 150 degrees Fahrenheit on the rooftop. And so the efficiency of the solar panel goes down. It's degraded for every degree higher than the ideal temperature. So here Qcells is telling you, yes, our 400 watt solar panel under normal operating conditions is only rated for 300 watts. And so if we go back here and we look at the microinverter that's rated for 300 watts, which is the IQ8 Plus, this is a very common pairing. A 400 watt solar panel, again, 400 watt ideal test condition solar panel, paired with a 300 watt microinverter because the actual real world condition rating of that panel is 300 watts. And so pairing it with a 300 watt microinverter is not, you're not, the customer's not missing out on anything, right? They're not really losing on anything in terms of real world performance. If they are, it's nominal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other thing too, guys, when I'm selling this, you sometimes, again, if you're not talking to engineer, technical type personalities, you want to use analogies that are going to help people understand the basics here, right? So one of the things I'll mention, like you were just referring to a second ago, when it comes to temperature coefficient and the way that the performance of the panels actually throttle down, I always say, hey, you ever leave your phone sitting out in the sun in the middle of summer and you get the overheating warning? That's effectively the same thing that a solar panel is doing under these extreme conditions. Now, Your phone is one singular battery cell. That's a separate conversation, where a solar panel does have the ability to still utilize power and perform, but it's just not as efficient. It's overheating, it's working harder, and it can't produce quite the same that it could under cooler temperatures. What's an interesting thing, and you can't really properly do this study, but if you were to essentially give us an environment where you had cool temperatures like wintertime temperatures, but with daylight that was equal to the amount of days in the summer, you'd actually have a significantly better producing solar system than you would under normal summer conditions, where it might be 90 degrees, roof temperature 140 degrees, sunlight for 10 hours. If you could have cooler temperatures, 50 degrees, but all the other same variables were the same, that system would produce better. So just something to keep in mind as well. That gets a little more into what's referred to as temperature coefficient for solar panels, but just something to explain as you're having this technical conversation about why this inverter makes sense for your 400-watt solar panel.
Right. And Dan, you did touch on this. This is likely going to come up with a more of a technical buyer. Guys, I do not recommend that you get into any of this during your standard sales presentation. This would be if an objection was raised. And again, this is likely to come up in a competitive selling situation with a technically minded buyer. Now, the guy who's pitching, let's say the guy who's pitching SolarEdge against your Enphase proposal may have told the homeowner, well, they're cheating you out of 100 watts per panel because they're using 400 or they're using 300 watt microinverters on a 400 watt panel. You need to be able to explain what I just explained to you, which why the 300 watt microinverter is actually the correct pairing for a correct pairing for a 400 watt solar panel, and be able to explain the difference between lab condition testing and the ratings that you get there versus real world condition testing. But if the homeowner doesn't take you down that path, I wouldn't go down that path, because if you're getting into all this on your initial sales presentation, 90% of people you're gonna leave them confused, and the confused mind always says no. So keep it light, keep it basic. If you want to see how I present it, those of you who are in Solar Surge University, you can see some of my live recordings with how I present the Enphase platform to homeowners. And that's how I do my initial presentation. But then you'll see on some of the calls that we have recorded there, the follow-up conversations. There's one client in particular in Texas where we had a number of follow-up conversations where he did then want to get into the specific technical specifications on the inverters and on the batteries. And I was able to match him step for step as we went down that path.
Yeah, the main thing there, obviously, Joe, is don't create objections for yourself, guys, that aren't needed. So that's like, you want to learn, and obviously this is just kind of sales 101. It doesn't matter the product or the service that you're selling and providing, but you want to speak the language of your buyer, of your client that you're working with. Now, if they want to have the technical conversation, let's be prepared. Let's be equipped. Invest in Solar Surge University. Allow us to kind of train you through our course on how to do these types of things and tap into some of that knowledge so that you can be the best, most highly trained, professional solar salesperson that there is. But at the same time, if all they care about was the end result, what can the system produce for me? What can it do for me? There's no need to get into, I chose this inverter because of this reason. And that's just, at that point, you're probably coming off to them as that you're just spouting out information, likely confusing them. And like Joe had just said, a confused mind says no. So just be wary of that. Just because you're equipped with the knowledge, you got to know when to play the cards, when to pull them out, when to use them. Most particularly if you're in a competitive selling situation and technical questions get brought up, let's know how to address that. But also, let's just know confidently from the beginning that you sized their system properly. And so that's a big part of that.
Looks like we got about 16 or 17 minutes left on the live training here.
Yeah. Joe, one thing I think is important here, as much as we do, often sell Enphase systems, promote some of the benefits, compared, I will say there can be a handful of different scenarios where competitive solutions or competitor solutions like a SolarEdge inverter could make sense. Now, if anybody's seen the video that Joe has on the channel from a little while back when he was out at Enphase, he was speaking with some of the Enphase team, particularly about some of their more high efficiency, the inverters that aren't currently on the market today, but ones that are working on that more directly match voltages of certain solar panels that are out there. So there are some times where, again, depending on the solar panel, depending on what the customer's needs are, what their goals are, there might be an instance where a solar edge solution or something else could be the better fit. So again, it's developing a knowledge base, guys, to know what option makes the right sense for them, both based on the equipment they want today, but primarily, again, needs analysis. What are their goals? What are they looking to accomplish? I have a gentleman that I'm working with currently where he wanted a particular higher efficiency panel. It was an REC panel option, particularly their pure R series, where Enphase doesn't have a particularly great inverter for that at the present moment. They have an IQ7 series, but they're working on an IQ8 that would allow that panel to be more optimum. And so for his system today, Solar Edge was the better solution because of the type of panel that he wanted. He wasn't concerned about battery backup. That just wasn't something that was a huge focus to him. So having the right sized inverter that can support that solar panel was important here. Otherwise, if I sold that REC panel with an Enphase inverter today, we would have significant clipping loss. It just wasn't going to be the right design. So you just need to kind of know some of these things. There is not a one size fits all approach, but I will say that more times than not, I do personally favor Enphase products because I think a lot of the systems we're designing as well, Joe, involve battery backup, and they involve, desires for, decreased redundancies, or not having one central point of failure. So that's where Enphase really, really does shine.
Yeah, yeah. And we should mention about the Enphase batteries as well. One of the big differentiator for Enphase's battery is the lithium iron phosphate chemistry. So right now, I believe Tesla Powerwall is still the -- most popular battery in terms of market share, but they're using the older chemistry, what's called the NMC chemistry, nickel, manganese, cobalt. Enphase, Franklin, some of the newer players, they're using the newer, what's considered the safer, more durable chemistry, more desirable for in the home use, which is the lithium iron phosphate. So that is another potential selling point on an Enphase system or an Enphase battery system. And again, folks, we just want to make sure that you're equipped with this information so that when it comes up, when it's appropriate in the selling conversation, you can be providing answers to your homeowners' questions. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, I think one of the other beautiful things about the Enphase system is this entire ecosystem, right? We go back to that visual from earlier, but also just on a practical day-to-day basis, having one central application that the homeowner operates out of. If you want to track the production of your system, whether it be the collective system, a grouping of panels, or one panel by itself, you do it from one app. You want to measure your consumption, you can do it from one app. You want to measure and maintain your battery, you can do it from one app. You can set different load profiles and pretty cool features in terms of you can set the battery for self-consumption. You can set it for battery backup mode. There's, I believe they call it Storm Guard or Storm Mode, where it does some preferential based on your GPS coordinates, prepares the battery's profile for the event of a power outage. So the Enphase system does provide tremendous functionality in that respect. And it's probably the best system for maybe more, I wouldn't say novice, but someone that just wants everything in one place and doesn't want to have to tinker and bounce around and just have one central, point of truth. The Enphase system works really, really well for that purpose.
I agree. And like you, Dan, I do find myself using Enphase for the majority of my projects, but we do offer both brands. So, full disclosure, I sell Solar Edge systems. I do Solar Edge systems as well from time to time. Maybe it's a ground mount system where all the panels are going to be, they're all going to be facing the same direction. Everything is going to be accessible at ground level, and we just want to get the most power we can at the lowest cost. Solar Edge might be the best solution for that. And I should mention that the Solar Edge solution is generally going to be the lower cost solution. And what I'm finding, kind of the vibe I'm getting, is that installers prefer Solar Edge because it is a much more streamlined, faster, potentially more profitable install. At least on install day, it's a more profitable install to use Solar Edge because it can be done faster. However, long term, depending on the reliability, there was a time, and this was many years ago now, but there was a time back in 2018 when Solar Edge unleashed a new line of inverters, and the failure rate was very, very high. And so even though it may have been a lower cost initial install, when you factor in all the post-install service work and maintenance work, you actually end up losing money compared to Enphase. But I know that they've made some improvements, and that their current line of inverters probably is not having anywhere near that kind of failure rate. But that's something that you want to consider as well. Certainly on initial install, SolarEdge is going to be a lower cost install. And that's why I think you're seeing installers favor SolarEdge, whereas many homeowners that do a lot of research, they tend to favor Enphase, especially if they can get it at the same or negligible price difference. Dan, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I think the other part, again, guys, to go back to the ranking of priorities, the first ranking is the contractor you work with, right? Because I have heard before in competitive scenarios where I've been selling Enphase and someone else is selling SolarEdge, the customer has relayed to me, oh yeah, well, so-and-so told me that if an inverter fails, we got to get up on the roof and fix it. SolarEdge is just easier because it's ground level. And I jokingly say, that's not your problem though. Like, you're the homeowner. You don't do the work. If you choose the right contractor, the contractor does the work. So what that salesperson didn't realize they were actually telling the homeowner by saying that is, oh, we're a little bit lazy and we don't want to have to worry about getting up on the roof surface and having to replace something if there was an issue. Because if there is, and you're working with a reputable contractor that stands behind their warranty, one microinverter fails on the roof, they already knew what they got themselves into. They knew that they were going to have to get up on the roof. They knew they were going to fix it, but they were willing to do that from the beginning because the chances were that they wouldn't have to do that as frequently, theoretically, as maybe they would have to go replace the SolarEdge inverter system. So that is something to, I've heard that one before where they're like, oh yeah, it's easier to service. That's not the homeowner's responsibility anyways, though. So it doesn't matter if you choose the right contractor, right? If you don't choose the right contractor, it could become your problem. And you're right. You probably rather work on ground level than have to get up on the roof if you can avoid it. So choosing the right contractor is going to be the right step first. And then after that, the equipment should really fall into place.
Yep. No, I agree with you 100%. And as a guy who has, I've had to be the guy out there many years ago, explaining to the homeowner, so, hey, sorry, Mr. Homeowner, your entire system's down. This inverter went bad. I can take it off. I'm going to have to wait for them to mail me a replacement. And until we get that replacement, your whole production is going to be down. And, that's an uncomfortable conversation. It's not a pleasant conversation, for the solar provider or for the homeowner. At least with a microinverter failure, you're down one panel, but your system is still producing, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like you're completely, out of power. And so I think even just from the customer experience side of things, there's not such a pain of, hey, I'm paying for this solar system. It's not doing anything for me because the inverter failed. It's, hey, one panel went bad. Don't worry, we'll fix it. But all the rest of the panels are working. We can see that on the app. We know exactly where the problem is, and we'll have a solution out, as soon as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it. But Joe, how about the conversation of with batteries, right? So if we're selling the IQ system, obviously the first thing is, and I think we've already acknowledged that a lot of times we do favor the Enphase batteries as part of that. But what other options are there? What are some other features that the IQ system, if you're just looking at the inverter side of it, would allow for battery purposes?
Sure. Well, of course, Enphase has their IQ battery, and I can put the display back up here. Let me see if I can get this back. So Enphase has their IQ battery. As we mentioned, they have two sizes of battery, the 5P and the 10T. And for me personally, most of what I'm doing is working with homeowners that want a whole house backup, in which case we're typically using 3 or 4 of the 10T battery, of the larger battery. So that would correspond to 30 or 40 kilowatt hours total storage. Right. So the advantage of using Enphase's own battery is that there's a tight communication between the battery and the microinverters. And so when you're running in an off-grid mode, it's actually very important to be able to throttle how much solar power is allowed to come into the system. Because if there's too much solar coming in and the house can't take any more and the battery can't take any more, we have to throttle that solar power down, because if the grid's down, we can't dump the excess to the grid. Enphase has a very elegant way of doing that, where Enphase can just turn off individual solar panels so it can match the solar panel power output to exactly how much the house and the battery needs. Whereas with other AC coupled batteries like Tesla or Franklin, if there's too much solar power coming in, it has to just shut all the solar off. It doesn't have the ability to tune individual panels. It has to shut all the solar off, wait for 5 minutes, and then try again to see if it can allow the solar to energize again. So you are going to get a more efficient off-grid performance using Enphase's own battery versus using any other AC coupled battery. But since it is a microinverter system and it's putting out AC power from the roof, right? You're going to have AC power coming off of your Enphase combiner here. You could use any AC coupling battery with the system as well. In fact, one combination that we use very frequently right now in Texas and also in Florida is the Enphase microinverter Enphase solar system on the roof paired with the Franklin whole home battery, which is another AC battery. Just because the Franklin battery gives us a little bit more storage capacity and a little bit more surge capacity for those large Texas and Florida homes that require multiple air conditioning units to be on backup power. So that option is available as well. Of course, you could use Tesla Powerwall. Dan, I know we've done a number of systems using Enphase microinverters, Enphase, and then using Tesla Powerwall as the battery backup. So any AC coupling battery will be compatible with the Enphase system. But if you want that tight integration, if you want that fine-tuned control of the battery being able to control each individual solar panel, then that's where the advantage comes in of using Enphase's own IQ battery system.
Yeah. The other important thing to know here too, and I believe this is the case. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I had a client that I'm actively working with who had a SunPower system installed. Now, it is different. The Enphase inverters that are integrated, directly integrated to the SunPower panels, are a unique inverter that is specific for those panels. And so the client that I had worked with wanted to add an Enphase battery system and was not able to add an Enphase battery system to the Enphase SunPower version of inverters because that was something that was developed by SunPower and Enphase directly, rendering the Enphase battery incompatible. So that is one thing to kind of keep in mind, guys, is when we're designing systems, a lot of times we'll maybe put like an REC panel against the Maxeon panels if you're looking at sort of high efficiency ratings. But the reason why we prefer that design is because we can then also choose an inverter that pairs well with that, giving a larger battery backup opportunity than in this case, I believe SunPower, their battery, I think it was called the SunVault, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that battery is the only one that's compatible with that version of the SunPower Enphase inverter.
Yeah, see, SunPower wants to have its own version of the platform. You know, what I was calling earlier the Enphase IQ platform. So it's kind of like the software that allows all those components to talk to each other. SunPower has their own version of that software platform. And so even if they might use an embedded Enphase microinverter power electronics in their panel, the software that all those components are talking on is a proprietary SunPower network or platform. And so Dan said it leads to compatibility issues. It's why I personally don't favor SunPower hardware or software, is because it does tend to limit your options as far as not being able to pull in a best of breed battery, maybe from a different manufacturer, or a best of breed load controller or something like that. So I do like the flexibility that Enphase offers. There's advantages to using Enphase proprietary equipment, but it also plays nice with other manufacturers' equipment. And we do that a lot here, is pulling in best of breed components to build the best overall system that's going to meet the homeowner's needs the best.
Absolutely. Joe, I guess final last thing here too, for what it's worth, is maybe just an additional tidbit. Main differences between the Enphase IQ 10T battery and the newer 5P battery. If you were to kind of quickly address those for people that might have questions about them. I know we tend to do, granted the 5P is newer, it's not really fully into the market yet, but even with that coming, 10T versus 5P, what would you really say there?
Great question, Dan. I'm glad that you asked that. So I think the main advantages with the 5P is you get more power both in and out. You get more power per unit of energy stored, which means that basically you can drain the battery faster, you can charge the battery faster with smaller battery storage. The advantage of the 10T is you get more capacity per battery, and they're also a lot less cost in terms of cost per kilowatt hour storage. So I think the 5P battery is best suited for smaller backup applications, critical loads backup only, because frankly, in order to get a true whole house backup, if you're talking about a house that has central air conditioning and heavy loads like this, you need to use so many of them to get the capacity you need. Like, for example, you would need to use about 6 of those 5P batteries to back up a home of any size in Florida that has central air conditioning. And if you compare the cost of using 6 5P batteries to get to 30 kilowatt hour storage versus using 3 of the 10T batteries, what you're going to find is that the 10T is much better cost value when you're looking at whole house and larger battery backups. I think the 5P, I think when we have it rolled out everywhere, we're going to probably use it most in applications where the homeowner wants partial home backup only, a lower cost, but where we're only using 1 or 2 of those smaller batteries.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly how I've explained it before as well. You're essentially getting half of the energy storage out of the 5P that you do out of the 10T. You are getting a little bit better continuous power and peak power, but by the time you essentially equal out the storage, you not only, number one, have invested more money in 2 5Ps than you would have in one 10T, but you're also probably taking up just more physical space out of the 2 5Ps than you would out of the 110T. So I think they're both going to have significant places in the market, but a lot of the designs that we tend to do are already 2+ battery options, so a quantity of 2 batteries or more, what I mean there. So, well, folks, I know that kind of brings us here to the hour. Went a little bit over, but appreciate the comments that came in. Sorry, we had a couple of these that might have been a little delayed in response as well. But appreciate everyone joining in here. And Joe, if you want to sign us off.
Yeah, guys, as always, thanks again for tuning into the live training. And for those that haven't got it already, make sure that you grab the free download, the Solar Surge virtual sales process. If you're just getting into solar sales, or if you'd like to understand better the professional consultative process that we use here, we have that free download available for you. Now, folks, we're here the same time every week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the live training. Be sure to put your questions in the comment section and we'll do our best and try to figure out why the questions aren't coming up real time anymore in the dashboard. But thanks for spending another hour with Solar Surge. Wishing you a successful week in solar sales, and we'll see you back here for next week's live training.